Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning to you. Good morning to you. All right. Good morning, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host, Shantae Charles. Every Tuesday, we chop it up concerning Black people, Black news, Black history. And so Tuesdays are our Black Table Talk edition. Listen, people of the Most High God of the African American descent, those of you who are also known as Black people, those of you who are also, some of you who call yourselves the descendants of the original Hebrews. I'm praying for all of y'all today. I'm praying. Yes, I am. I'm praying for all of you. I wish y'all was doing the same for me. But I'm going to still pray. I'm just going to pray. I'm going to pray for everybody. Yeah. We all need prayer. We all need prayer this morning because I've come to understand, and I'm going to continue to say, I'm going to continue to understand and overstand, as some people say. I'm going to understand and overstand that if you have brown skin, you can be a target. Yeah. So people aren't walking around asking you what your religious beliefs are before they want to attack you. They're looking at your brown skin. All right. So for those of you who haven't figured that out yet, that if you have brown skin, you could be a target. Let me just let you know, you could be a target. Now, those of us who believe in Jesus the Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, Yahushua. Yeah, I know all of I know a couple of what we all say. Just so you know. All right. Those of us who believe in him, we're tending to operate by a higher principle of believing that God is going to protect us and shield us from all hurt, harm, and danger. Those of you who may not share that belief or no belief at all, we're still hoping that you are protected from all hurt, harm, and danger, because these are perilous times in which we live. So I need everybody to be looking out for everybody. If you see something, say something. It's really that simple. If you're a white person and you see something, say something. It's really that simple. All right? Because evil is evil. It doesn't matter who's perpetrating it. But right now, in this country, we seem to have an overabundance of evil being perpetrated by people who look like our white brothers and sisters. And we're talking about mass shootings. We're talking about people going online. Threatening certain things. And, saying that they're going to go into certain spaces. So if you see something, say something. Good morning to those of you who are coming in and who are with us for the first time. We're just trying to encourage everybody to look out for your fellow human being, look out for one another. All right. This is very practical. It's common sense. If you see something, say something. If you overhear someone planning to go and do harm to Black and brown people, we need you to report them. We don't need you to say, oh, I thought they were just playing. No, we need you to report them. We need you to pick up your phone. We need you to call the police. We need you to call the FBI, whoever you need to report to, and we need you to report it. We don't need you to be saying after the fact, oh, I overheard them, but I didn't really take them seriously. Or they was talking about this at the last Sunday dinner, about how they want to destroy black and brown people, but I just thought it was just dinner talk. No, we need you to actually report what you see. So today, we're jumping back into Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. I can't tell you the millions of black people that need to read this book, mainly out of the Christian community, because we still think that this is not harming children, and it actually is. I'm gonna need your pastor to pick this book up and read it so they can stop saying certain things over the pulpit that they probably shouldn't be saying, because science doesn't hold up to it. Data doesn't hold up to it. Then we're going to The Color of Compromise, the truth about the American church's complicity in racism, namely Protestants and evangelicals. And then we're going back to Stamped from the Beginning as we continue to go through the definitive history of racist ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. He does have a new book coming out called How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I can't wait to get my hands on it because we're going to add it to our reading for this season. But right now, he's certainly given us enough to read right here. Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. And we have been on this topic for a while because we are dealing with the symbol of the black mother, and the black mother as black queen. But the black queen also has to take some responsibility for what has happened to our black kings, because unfortunately somebody convinced black women that they had to step in and try to be both mother and father to their children. And so we have some detrimental results as a detrimental outcome, as a result. So we are coming to dealing with and talking about the abuse of black men at the hands of their mothers and how that has negatively impacted the black community as a whole. And we're going to read a couple of pages out of this, and then we're going to just let you think about what was said. We're still on Nicholas Gaines. Nicholas Gaines, a 30-year-old from Salt Lake City, thought that being hit was a normal black thing. In my circle, it is and was completely normal and justified because you are her child. So she, your mother, could do whatever she wanted to you because it came from a place of love. It wasn't until I got married and had my own child with my white wife and I saw her have such an adverse reaction to my whooping our son that I realized how deeply ingrained as normative and embedded in our culture that whooping is, Gaines said. Gaines suffered from a common rationalization by black women who often believe that their power to whoop their child is a God-given right. Whereas, according to interviews with low-income black mothers conducted by researchers from the University of Missouri and the University of Connecticut, children's grandmothers, aunts, uncles, and biological fathers had to earn the privilege of disciplining through prior acts that earned mothers' trust that the individuals really cared about their children. On the other hand, we can find plenty of black folks who will insist that whoopings from their black mothers made them love black women because we're strong and capable and demand respect. Gaines said he didn't have any animosity toward women, but, quote, I do think having a mom who was a traditional black mom, loud, overbearing, strict, religious, made me really timid as a child. I always tried to make her happy and please her, he said. In dating, I never wanted to be with a woman who had those tendencies or personality. I wanted a strong, educated, fierce, and career-driven woman, but I didn't want any of those aspects or traits that my mom had that I worked so hard to please. McNeil lost his mom at age 10. His grandmother who raised him died a few years ago. He misses them both. Their deaths seem to have foreclosed his ability to feel anger or bitterness toward them. Besides the whoopings, they were both warm and nurturing, which is why I honestly felt conflicted when I was disciplined. He said, they made me believe that it hurt them more than it hurt me. When Brooks reflects back on memories of his mother, the recurring theme, he said, is that she ruined his life. So much of my current dysfunction in personal and romantic relationships can be laid there. So many of my personal failures, not all of them, of course, because I believe that we are responsible for our own actions. But when you start off with a faulty perspective or with misinformation and you have to work to discard beliefs about yourself and people in general and relearn on a trial and error basis, I don't believe that I should shoulder all of the responsibility for the trajectory of my life. Honestly, in a nutshell, when I think about my mother, I wish I had never been born to her, he said. Brooks also said that he has borne some animosity toward Black women as a result of his childhood experiences. Although he is physically attracted to Black women, he's losing interest in them for long-term commitments. I don't think I will ever marry a Black woman, and I'm relatively certain that I won't date another one, at least not in the near future, he said. I don't believe that there is anything inherently wrong with Black women, nor are they deserving of being bashed as a group. I just feel that my experiences with my mother and the resulting tendency to choose women that share many of her personality traits and characteristics have turned me off because I just don't think I will ever find one that I'm compatible enough to be with. Honestly, although I love my mother, I almost grew to hate her for beating me, Billingsley said. The beatings were so painful I often had marks. One time my mother waited until I had taken a shower to beat me while I was still wet. It was awful. Although I knew she loved me, she had a mean side. I often felt that she was taking out her own private frustrations while beating me. From time to time, my mom would threaten me with, "Ramon, keep going. I'm going to whoop you for old and new." His resentment of his mother grew so strong that he tried to poison her by putting dishwashing liquid in her Mylanta. CM unapologetically said that he hated his mother while growing up, even when she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during his freshman year of high school and was confined to a wheelchair. I was never happier, he said. The only thought that ran through my mind was that she would never be able to hit me again. I was 13, and that was when I really started to act out. I stole my mom's ATM card and stole $80 from her account. I could say that part of me just wanted to have money, but the real reason was because I knew she could not hit me anymore, and that she no longer had the strength to chase me out of the house or punch me in the face or throw a jar at my head. For a long time, Millian said he slept with and dated only white women. I saw all Black women as a reflection of my aunt because I thought they all had the same viewpoint when it came to how to treat children. I had immense animosity for Black women in Black culture. Life has come full circle for me. I'm now married to a Black woman. I have no children, and I have no intentions of treating my children a fraction of the way I was treated as a child. While he has never hit a girl or woman, Alsop believes that, quote, all of us Black men were cultured and socialized to hate Black women at some point. I actually agree with that. So we were all misogynists in training by our preteens, some earlier. I think I really started by my animosity to women after my first heartbreak. When I felt like I couldn't be loved, I just stopped loving. Fullwood has never hit a woman, but admits he has committed acts of revenge. I did play with the hearts of many. I would gain a woman's love just to throw it away. I found pleasure in it. I had one of the indestructible Nokia phones, and it gave me a satisfaction feeling when I would dump a girl who was really into me, and I would call them up and say, "You're dumped." Hang up and delete their number. In college, CM was extremely promiscuous. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. CM was extremely promiscuous. He said, I had no respect for women. He said he never hit a woman, but he did verbally bash them. Some of that I blame on my mom setting a bad example for Black women. Some of that comes from me not having a positive male role model, and part of that was just me being selfish and only looking out for my needs and wants. I never kept a girlfriend. I'm single now, and I would break up with any woman who showed signs or tendencies that reminded me of my mother. I was so unforgiving. I had severe trust issues and still do to this day. After each failed relationship I've had, I attribute to not having any examples growing up of positive male or female relationships that were truly nurturing and loving. He also said that he's afraid to have children. I don't want to become a parent like my mother. I don't want to become violent with my children, and that fear has driven me away from having children. I am by far way more understanding and open-minded than my mother, but I still fear having a bad temper. There are many contributing factors that can explain Black maternal violence against boys. For one, living in a racist, patriarchal society encourages domestic violence, creating hateful divides among Black men, Black women, and Black children. It then encourages us to settle our rage with physical violence against the most vulnerable among us because we won't strike back at the system oppressing us all. Whooping our children is yet another well-oiled part of the violence machine that undermines us, makes us weak, and causes those we love to hate us. Based on my interviews with Black men who were whooped by their mothers, it is clear that the burden and the heart-wrenching anger caused by their father's abandonment, their mother's struggle to provide for basic needs, and deficient or non-existent systems of support were sources of the displaced physical and emotional violence they experienced in boyhood. Many of these men are products of generational father absence, which has been exacerbated by the war on drugs and mass incarceration, economic divestment in communities of color, and state violence against Black families. Some of their fathers abandoned them, are or were in prison, killed in wars, drugged out, mentally ill, or simply unknown. And so their mothers, living in a society that incessantly heaps insults and denigration onto Black women, had to bear the weight of those absences, raise their sons to the best of their ability in a country where the threat of death at the slightest misstep is a daily reality. Black women have had to pay twice, once for their own past traumas and then for their sons' futures. Black maternal violence against sons is also linked to America's obsessive fear of Black boys and men. That fear, which is embedded in U.S. culture, is rooted in destructive stereotypes that harken back to Nat Turner's 1831 slave rebellion in Southampton County, Virginia, which left 50 white people murdered. That fear evolved after slavery when freed Black people began to take control over their lives and build communities of their own, posing a threat to white males and the racial order. The image of Black males as beaters and rapists of white women justified the lynching of thousands of Black males. The fear of Black men continues to be seeded by mainstream media, which casts Black men as high school dropouts and neglectful absent fathers, and over reports of incidents of crimes by Black offenders. You would not know how many crimes there are of white offenders because the media oversaturates you with crimes that have Black faces. These negative stereotypes may impact the way Black mothers raise their sons. While some mothers focus their energies on encouraging their sons to disprove racist stereotypes, others are terrified of their sons growing up. Through many generations, it is common to hear mothers, aunties, and grandmothers routinely declare that their sons, beginning in infancy and toddlerhood, are so bad. This view sets the stage for beating boys as if that is the only or best way to keep them in school, out of prison, or alive. As their sons grow bigger and stronger, these women may fear the possibility that their sons will begin to exhibit violence towards them. That fear might be compounded by past abuse they experience at the hands of other male relatives. And so in turn, these mothers may feel that they have to beat their sons into submission and complacency out of love and fear. Part of the work we need to do as a community to heal the many wounds that scar us and that we pass on from one generation to the next is to allow Black men space to talk about and share their pain without challenging their manhood and dismissing their pain as woman blaming. If we are to ever heal and progress as a people, we must look at these dynamics objectively and not assume that Black mothers and women are being attacked or shamed as we learn to understand what is shaping Black boys and men and their attitudes and treatment of Black women. The men I interviewed told me that they've long lived in silence about the violence they experienced at their mother's hand because anytime they attempted to express their pain, they were reminded, she's your mother, or at least she was there, as if that makes the pain and the scars disappear. To really get to the root of the problem, we need to help Mama down from her pedestal and hold her and fathers accountable for disguising all pain as love. First, we need to look at the fact that Black mothers who whoop their sons are celebrated in our culture. Whoopings are one of the few things that Black mothers are praised for in mainstream media. Rather than hearing and seeing men like those I interviewed, which would force us to confront their pain, we celebrate the whoopings. Rather than looking at persistent discrimination and inequality, we grab at narratives that locate success or failure in relationship to discipline, choices, values, and whoopings. Think about all the professional athletes who have praised their mamas for whooping them, and the stand-up comedians who know they're guaranteed to get laughter of recognition by sharing tales of childhood beatings. Or think about the lyrics of popular rap songs by artists who wax nostalgically about these beatings and punishments. In his song Dear Mama from his 1995 album Me Against the World, the late Tupac Shakur reminisced about the stress he caused his poor single mother on welfare and how running from the police, that's right, Mama catch me putting a whooping on my backside. And though she was a crack fiend who kicked him out into the streets, she was still a Black queen. In the 1991 soundtrack to the film Boys in the Hood, there's a song called Mama Don't Take No Mess by the female rap artist Yo-Yo. She said that when she was growing up, quote, we got our A's kicked because talking back is foul play. Her down A mama had her own way of getting across, which was a belt of steel. She was quick to tell you, don't let your mouth get your whooped. She was quick to tell you, moms didn't play the okey doke can get choked. F around and get your neck broke. On his 2003 album, The Preacher's Son, Wycliffe Jean has a song called 3 Nights in Rio, in which he talks about getting whooped by his mom for stealing. When I was young, they called me Robin Hood because I stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Went back home, mama whooped on my A. Said I'll be if I let you live like that. Meanwhile, next door neighbor's drunk man beating on his wife while the kids were watching. More recently, we saw the same kind of confrontation dramatized between Dr. Dre and his mother in the biopic Straight Outta Compton. In one scene, Dr. Dre's mom slaps the daylights out of him for mouthing off and expressing a dissenting view, which his mother decides is an act of disrespect. In fact, the film represents this abusive act in a positive light. His mother loves him and wants the best for him. The slap is transformative and empowering. It leads Dre to leave home in pursuit of his dreams rather than lie in his room listening to music. The message is clear. Rather than pull themselves up by their bootstraps, Black children need to be slapped in the name of the American dream. Yet again, we see the commonplace celebration of a Black mother whooping her child into success. He becomes a billionaire and game changer because of his mom, because she beats him to be more disciplined. In another scene, she is seen as loving and caring as he struggles with the death of his brother. It is striking how even amid the outrage over the fact that the film glossed over Dr. Dre's history of physically abusing women, for which he later apologized, we are still okay with whooping children with impunity. It is striking not only because abuse and dehumanizing violence is now being recast as good parenting, but also because this is a pathway toward violence against women and other types of violence in our communities. Something to think about. So next week, Lord willing, we'll be in our evening editions of Daring Dialogues, which will begin at 6 p.m. And we will conclude this topic about the Black Queen and how not calling into account and not addressing these dynamics is actually hurting Black boys who become Black men, who began to, in many cases, disparage black women, because most people will tell you that a boy gets his idea of womanhood from his mother. So if you think your mother is loud, angry, abusive, etc., 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 and you want to get as far away from that imaging of that mother as possible, then if you cannot find a black woman that will get you as far away from that image as possible, then you definitely will probably go outside of your culture to do that. However, what's interesting about going outside of your culture is I've seen several white women with the same attitude and behavior. So just because you go outside your culture, it doesn't mean that you're going to escape those personality traits. You might think you are, but there's a strong possibility you're going to find it in other cultures. Just pay attention. All right. So let us talk the color of compromise. We're talking making race in the colonial era. And we're going to talk about the Middle Passage today and the African slave trade in North America. Over the next 300 years, the transatlantic slave trade transported more than 10 million Africans to the Americas in a forced migration of epic scale. Now, this is not counting how many they attempted to transport. This is not counting the tribal chiefs that actually some of them did step up and fought back to keep people from being stolen. This only really is an estimate of how many actually made it through the Middle Passage. This does not account for the millions that died on the way, that died before they got to Elmina Castle, that died and were plooped into the ocean off the boats. Just wanted to put that in there. About 2 million people, it is estimated, perished on the voyage. The human cost in terms of suffering, indignity, and death caused by this commerce can never be fully comprehended, and it can also never be fully compensated, but it can be compensated. I know sometimes people think, well, we cannot grasp all of the value of what happened. No, we know you can't. We know you can't, but you should pay something. Don't let that be an excuse to say we can't do anything. Let that be a reason that you should be willing to do something. Okay? Yeah. This experience is often misunderstood and downplayed in the present day. Just recently, I was reading an article where they found some Africans, I want to say in Portugal, and they were able to test them and find out that they were of Bantu descent. And they found their grave of these Africans still shackled together that had been buried, that have now been unearthed. So they're still finding evidence, because some people will actually deny that the slave trade even took place. The appalling nature of Christian cooperation with slavery cannot be understood apart from the description of bondage and its effect on Africans. The process of enslavement began with the European desire for products that needed raw materials from the Americas. Ships would sail from England, France, Spain, Portugal, and other nations to the western coast of Africa. So when people ask, well, shouldn't other countries be paying reparations besides the United States? They most definitely should. But that's not going to stop people requiring the United States to also pay. Back to the topic. There, the Europeans would either barter with local African tribes for slaves captured in war, a common practice at the time, or kidnap their own slaves. Enslavers marched their captives sometimes hundreds of miles to the western coast of Africa. The slaves were tied together or had their necks clamped with wooden yokes. Many died of starvation or exhaustion. Some committed suicide along the way. Those who survived were taken to structures called factories. These were fortress-like facilities designed to hold African slaves until they were loaded onto ships. Slave traders separated families and tribes so the Africans could not band together and rebel. So when an African American or a Black American goes and gets a DNA test done, as we talked about before, oftentimes they will have mixes of countries or mixes of tribes within their DNA. Slave traders separated tribes so Africans could not band together and rebel. So you might have a couple of countries on the inside of you because they were separating them out. Finally, sometimes after months of waiting, the slaves shuffled onto ships called slavers bound for the Americas. Though the process of dehumanization began at the moment of capture, it took on new dimensions on the ship. Slave traders often shackled them together to prevent them from jumping overboard or rebelling. African slaves endured a horrific journey, the so-called Middle Passage, from their native land to South America, the Caribbean islands, or North America. It normally took 2 or 3 months to cross the Atlantic, but for some, the journey lasted up to 6 months. Olaudah Equiano published an autobiography in 1789 called The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vassa, to record his life as a slave and eventually a free man. He was born around 1745 as part of the Igbo tribe in modern-day Nigeria. Igbos are known to be or seen to be part of the Hebrews. Yeah, of the scattered Hebrews. Yeah, those people. And slave traders kidnapped Equiano and his sister when he was about 11 years old. Years later, Equiano wrote about the traumatic experience of being packed into a slave ship as a piece of cargo. In one particularly stomach-churning recollection, Equiano described the heat, the smell, and human waste that accompanied slaves as they languished below deck. The stench of the whole while we were on the coast was so intolerably loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there for any time. He continued, this produced copious perspirations from a variety of loathsome smells, brought on sickness among the slaves, of many which died. Finally, he told of the tubs which held human excrement into which the children often fell and were almost suffocated. By the time he wrote his autobiography, Equiano had converted to Christianity. As he reflected on his life, he viewed his experiences through the lens of faith and commented on the hypocrisy of slave traders who claimed to be Christian. Recollecting on the repeated rape of African women by slave traders aboard the ship, Equiano wrote that it was a disgrace not only of Christians, but of men. I have even known them to gratify their brutal passion with females not yet even 10 years old. Pedophilia, human trafficking, sex trafficking. Sounds about right. On the kidnapping of unsuspecting Africans and their separation from family, Equiano asked, O ye nominal Christians, might not an African ask you, learned you from this your God, who says unto you, do unto all men as you would men should do unto you? Black people immediately detected the hypocrisy of American-style slavery. They knew the inconsistencies of the faith from the rank odors, the chains, the blood, and the misery that accompanied their life of bondage. Instead of abandoning Christianity, Black people went directly to the teachings of Jesus and challenged white people to demonstrate integrity, which we still seem to be doing in 2019. These depredations occurred before the slaves had even arrived in the Americas. The inhumanity of bondage began as soon as kidnappers snatched the Africans from their tribes, and most often the cruelty continued until the African's death, unless one happened to secure freedom. John Newton, born in England in 1725, is best known for penning the hymn Amazing Grace. His life is remembered as a story of redemption. He was a lifelong sailor. Newton served as captain of the slave ship for a time. He marks March 10, 1748 as his Christian conversion. He did not stop his involvement in the transatlantic slave trade immediately, however. He continued slaving until he suffered a major stroke in 1754 and retired from the sea. After years of waiting and several attempts from different denominations, Newton was finally ordained as an Anglican priest in 1764 and became famous for his ministry at a church in Olney. This is why some people have a problem with people singing the song Amazing Grace from the slave trading John Newton, who didn't stop trading until a stroke stopped him. More than 3 decades after he retired from sailing, Newton wrote a pamphlet called Thoughts Upon the African Slave Trade. He wrote it as both an encouragement for English politicians to abolish the slave trade and as a personal confession. I hope it will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me that I was once an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders. Newton, a celebrated example today, stands out because he eventually repudiated slavery. If Newton had simply remained a slave trader, he would have been so typical that it is likely no one would remember his name. Even after surviving the Middle Passage, Africans were only beginning to experience the horrors of slavery. Ships usually landed at a port in the Caribbean, either Barbados or Antigua, for example. Then slave ship captains did their best to sell their cargo as quickly as possible. Sometimes buyers would purchase an entire ship's cargo, but they purchased enslaved people a few at a time. Slave captains would then sail from port to port looking for buyers. Sometimes the captains used the scramble. With all the slaves corralled into one pen, potential buyers would rush into the pen, grabbing as many slaves as they could afford in a chaotic spectacle of greed and brutality. Upon purchase, the newly arrived Africans were seasoned to prepare them for their lives of bondage and labor in the Americas. Seasoning involved adapting to a different climate and to new foods. It also involved teaching the Africans a new language, usually French, Spanish, or English. Africans were trained for their work, which was typically agricultural or involved plowing, hoeing, and weeding. This acculturation took a toll. As many as 1/3 of African slaves died within their first 3 years in the Americas. Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, which outlawed slavery in Britain and in its colonies in 1833. Much of the momentum for these changes came from Christians. For example, William Wilberforce was influenced by John Newton, who encouraged the young parliamentarian to remain in his post and keep fighting to end slavery. Yet abolitionism did not arise from truly pure motive. The decline of slavery in Britain coincided with the rise of the Industrial Revolution. The factory became the urban farm that was producing most British goods. The poet William Blake called factories dark satanic mills. Men, women, and children were now working 12-hour days in stifling heat, tending whirring steam-powered machines that could slice off a finger or crush a skull in the blink of a sleep-deprived eye. Although British slavery declined around this time, the rise in industrial productivity fed this demand for raw materials. The demand for cotton grew 20-fold in the decades after the turn of the 19th century. North American slavery supplied the ravenous international appetite for cotton. So, we can safely say that the Industrial Revolution was really just a new kind of slavery that required a different kind of slave in order to keep it operable, but it also was requiring children at this point. There were no such things as child labor laws, so children were also working those 12-hour days. They were stuffing children down chimneys. If you've ever read up on the Industrial Revolution, They were stuffing children down chimneys to clean them, and the children were getting stuck and suffocating. Yeah, it was horrible. But this is history, and we need to learn it. Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. We are backtracking, and we're going to the notion of created equal and what's happening with early America, who is now trying to break away from Britain because Britain wants them to stop their slave trade, and America does not want to. Over the next 5 years, the fighting over independence and freedoms remained pitched, but the British failed to crush the revolt. On January 5th, 1781, in one of their last-ditch efforts, the Redcoats reached the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia. British soldiers were hunting Virginia's governor as if he were a runaway. With 10,000 acres of land in his possession to choose from, Governor Thomas Jefferson hid his family on an inherited property about 90 miles southwest of Monticello, which is the region in which our ministry is located now. There in hiding, Jefferson finally found the time to answer the 23 questions that French diplomat Francois Barbé Marbois had sent to the 13 American governors in 1780. The Frenchman asked for information on each state's history, government, natural resources, geography, and population. Only a few responded, and none as comprehensively as Thomas Jefferson. A new member of Philadelphia's American Philosophical Society, Jefferson had collected thousands of books for his Monticello library and enjoyed a scholarly challenge. He titled his book of answers, Notes on the State of Virginia. He wrote for French diplomats and intellectuals as well as close friends in America. He sent him the manuscript by the end of 1781. With no intention to publish, Jefferson unabashedly expressed his views on Black people, and in particular on potentially freed Black people. Incorporating the freed Blacks into the state was out of the question, he declared. Deep-rooted prejudices entertained by the whites, 10,000 recollections by the Blacks of the injuries they have sustained, new provocations, the real distinctions which nature has made, and many other circumstances will divide us into parties and produce convulsions which will probably never end, but in the extermination of the one or the other race. Jefferson was not all too hopeful about Black people being set free. His mindset was, if they start remembering all the stuff that we've done to them, it's going to result in one or the other of us being exterminated. This hodgepodge of thoughts was classic Jefferson, classically both anti-slavery and anti-abolition, with the segregationist dose of nature's distinctions and an anti-racist dose acknowledging white prejudice and discrimination. Revolutionary War General George Washington had a different take on the prejudices. When asked to join an anti-slavery petition campaign in 1785, he did not think the time was right. It would be dangerous to make a frontal attack on a prejudice which is beginning to decrease, Washington advised. Prejudice beginning to decrease in 1785? However General Washington came to this conclusion, the soon-to-be first president sounded one of the first drumbeats of supposed racial progress to drown out the passionate arguments of anti-racism. Thomas Jefferson did propose a frontal attack on slavery in Notes on the State of Virginia, a plan he would begin to endorse for the rest of his life. The mass schooling, emancipation, and colonization of Africans back to Africa. Yeah, I know you thought it was Abraham Lincoln that came up with the idea first, but no, it was Thomas Jefferson. All right. He wanted them to be colonized back to Africa. Send them back. Jefferson, who enslaved blacks at Monticello, listed the real distinctions which nature has made, that is, those traits he believed made free black incorporation into the new nation impossible. Whites, he said, were more beautiful, as shown by blacks' preference of them. He was paraphrasing Edward Long and John Locke in a passage, but it was still ironic that the observation came from the pen of a man who preferred black women himself. Let me just sip this OJ. Very ironic that he's penning a letter saying that black people prefer white people, while he was getting his groove on with Sally Hemings a couple of doors down from him and baby making with Sally Hemings. Black people had a memory on par with whites, Jefferson continued, but in reason were much more inferior. He then paused to mask his racist ideas in this scientific neutrality. It would be unfair to follow them to Africa for this investigation. We will consider them here on the same stage with the whites, and where the facts are not apocryphal on which a judgment is to be formed. On this same stage, he could never seem to find that a black had uttered a thought above the level of plain narration, and he said he never saw an elementary trait of painting or sculpture among black people. Dude, you all stole people from a culture that was creating pyramids and had libraries, and you're trying to say that they have no culture and no ability to create something artistic. Religion, he said, indeed has produced a Phyllis Wheatley, but it could not produce a poet. This dude, and he was running all of Virginia. Now a lot of stuff makes sense. With notes on the state of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson emerged as the preeminent American authority on black intellectual inferiority. Blank, blank. The status would persist over the next 50 years. This man is the expert on black inferiority, and his status, he gets that status for the next 50 years. Jefferson did not mention the innumerable enslaved Africans who learned to be highly intelligent blacksmiths and shoemakers and bricklayers and coopers and carpenters and engineers and manufacturers and artisans and musicians and farmers and midwives and physicians and overseers and house managers and cooks and bi and trilingual translators, all of the workers who made his Virginia plantation and many others almost entirely self-sufficient. It's just like a white supremacist to go steal a whole nation of people and then claim that those nation of people can't do anything while they are running your entire home and land. Jefferson had to ignore his own advertisements for skilled runaways and many advertisements from other planters calling for the return of their runaway valuable skilled captives, who were remarkably smart and sensible by their ads, and very ingenious at any work by their slave runaway ads. One wonders whether Jefferson really believed his own words. Did Jefferson really believe black people were smart in slavery, but yet stupid in freedom? Because that's what I see right now in our society. I mean, you're a smart Negro slave, but when you operate in freedom and independence, then all of a sudden you're dumb. I wonder where the 45th president got that notion from. Notes on the state of Virginia was replete with other contradictory ideas about black people. And we're going to stop after this paragraph here. They are at least as brave and more adventuresome than whites because they lack the forethought to see danger till it be present, Jefferson wrote. Africans felt love more, but they felt pain less, he said. And their existence appears to participate more of sensation than reflection. That is why they were disposed to sleep when abstracted from their diversions and unemployed in labor. You mean the labor that went from sunup to sundown? How dare they actually think that they can sleep as human beings? An animal whose body is at rest and who does not reflect must be disposed to sleep, of course. But on the previous page, Jefferson cast blacks as requiring less sleep. A black, after hard labor throughout the day, will be induced by the slightest amusements to sit up till midnight. In Jefferson's vivid imagination, lazy blacks desired to sleep more than whites, but as physical servants, they required less sleep. Oh, the oxymorons. Next week, we will continue to read about Jefferson's folly and his descriptions that are living hundreds and hundreds of years later, showing his own ignorance concerning Black people. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host today, Shantae Charles. I hope that I have said something that will get you to pick up a book, namely this one, or the other two that we have shared in on today. If you want to join us for the talk back, if you want to join us for our audience response, I will leave the link here so you can join us over on Periscope to hear from our audience. Thank you for tuning in, Facebook Live. Take care and God bless.